Okay, so I may be stupid. I was driving home from a doctor's appointment this morning before we started recording, and felt a bump, a bit of a jostle to my vehicle. Didn't shake me around too much, but definitely wasn't a normal bump in the road. And I looked around and assumed it was debris on the Arizona freeway, because Arizona has very crappy freeways, and because while driving home I had already seen not one but two vehicles with blown out tires sitting on the side of the road. But when several miles later I pull over and get out of my vehicle to go to my haircut appointment, I realized that someone hit me. Someone rear-ended me, my bumper on the freeway. Now he doesn't know this.
No! What?
And there's this lovely, huge dent in the back of my bumper. I'll send Naomi some photos afterwards. Big blue streak from, someone's paint job. I'm very comfortable saying I was not at fault because it was located where a car coming in behind me in a back lane would have hit me. But yeah, little surprising. Now, the reason I say that I'm stupid is not only did I not recognize that this person had rear-ended me, I also didn't recognize the fact that I think the same person was trying to, flag me down and get me over to the side of the road. The car was driving in front of me for the next, 4 miles, and the entire time I was like, that's weird. Their signal light is on, but they're not moving over in the lanes.
Joel!
In fairness, though, they did not do anything like stick their head out of the window or flashers or any of the other things that might indicate, hey, something happened. And again, in my defense, Arizona freeways are incredibly crappy. But yes, if you've been listening to this podcast for several years and are like, wow, Joel, you're so enlightened and informed and well-read, well, you're also a fucking idiot for listening to this because I'm stupid in turn.
Oh my god, Joel, are you okay? Nothing's wrong, right?
Yeah, that's why we're recording at 11 o'clock like we discussed.
Oh my god, Joel.
Watch as I just, wake up and, I'm just a bag of bruises, 16 broken bones. I have to use a wheelchair for the rest of my life. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Okay,
Anyways,
wow.
welcome back to Why We'll Know and Date These Guys. It's a podcast run by a stupid person and his sister. We discuss the culture and media surrounding relationships and why everything's so messed up. And today we got a book to talk about that I actually really enjoyed, and Naomi doesn't know anything about, so I'm going to tell her some things. But before we get into that book, I'm going to try today's drink, which is Yao's Chrysanthemum tea drink. I definitely butchered that, too. I picked this up with a number of other drinks from the Asian grocery store in Mesa, Arizona.
Joel, I just want to know where your freaking strawberry vanilla poppy is, because you told me you were going to try it, and you didn't freaking try it.
That's buried deep in the cupboard somewhere. I'll have to recover it. This isn't bad. It's kind of weird. It's sweet. I'm trying to figure out... Okay, it's cane sugar in here. Yeah, there's too much cane sugar in here. It's almost like a southern sweet tea made with traditional Asian tea flavors. I don't hate it, but it's not my favorite. I would prefer a lot of other brewed tea blends like Snapple, frankly, over this. So, not the worst, but refreshing. Huh?
Good, solid.
Okay, so Naomi, today we are discussing a book I came across online while scrolling through Instagram, doing nothing one evening. Instagram has gotten to the point where its targeted advertising is actually pretty effective on me. I don't purchase a lot of things, but I'm like, oh, that seems kind of cool. I think this is because there's a lot of ads where I'll do the notification feature that says this ad is not relevant to me. And so over time, they've mined my metadata, and they know now exactly the things that interest me.
They got you.
So they got me. So the ad was a woman, Vanessa Marin, with her husband talking about a new book they were putting out called Sex Talks. And Vanessa Marin, I did a little bit of research prior to this episode, is this sex therapist. She's been on Instagram and social media. She's been doing sex therapy for about 20 years. So she does have a bit of a following. She's been talking about sex therapy and trying to promote healthy attitudes towards sexual relationships between couples. And I think she's already written a book, and this is, I believe, her second. But I was like, oh, Sex Talks. That sounds fascinating. Because as we've discussed before on this podcast, Naomi, communication with partners is really important. Mm-hmm. But often, communication with people, even those that you love and respect, can be incredibly difficult. Would you agree?
I would, yes.
Yeah. So the entire book and the advertisement was hey, we're going to talk about how do you accurately communicate what you want to your partner without hurting anybody's feelings and getting what you want out of a sexual relationship. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I should buy that. So the reason I have this long-winded wind-up for the book is because the book that I purchased, which Naomi cannot see because we are not currently on camera, is the book Sex Talks, Vanessa Marin, written by a guy named Samuel Nono. Now, I'm an individual who thinks that you should support authors and purchase, books like new from publishers. But when I was looking for a copy of this book to purchase online, I saw a copy of a book for $30 from like Barnes & Noble, and then I saw a copy that was secondhand used for $7 from, I think, Thrift Books or something. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go for this one. The one that showed up, and again, Naomi cannot see this, but for those who are Patreons, you can definitely enjoy, is like a 15-page manifesto, again written not by Vanessa Marin, but by a guy named Samuel Nono. And when this showed up on my door, I initially thought that Vanessa Marin had scammed me, because this book is just a collection of interviews about her upcoming book, Sex Talks. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Well, it turns out this is one of a new wave of AI-based scams that are incredibly close in titles to other popular books. So if someone writes a book called, like, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, somebody could write another book called something like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone 2 and sell a bunch of copies from people who weren't paying close enough attention when they clicked the button. And often, people search Amazon by, like, price. So if you're the lowest priced book, you could definitely capitalize on the fact that people may not be familiar with the author enough to figure out something's a scam. So I did want to talk about that briefly before we got into the actual book, Sex Talks, because I found an article from Wired on January 10th talking about this. Kate Nibbs says, there's scammy AI-generated book rewrites that are flooding Amazon, and apparently thousands of authors are having this problem because people can write very similar versions of their book that, even with an Amazon preview, looks like the book that they were trying to purchase, and they can't really do anything because you can't copyright most book titles. And this effectively means that scammers can put out thousands of books a day and capitalize on much more popular, much more instructional, educational books, and no one's happy. Well, I'm sure the scammers are happy. Now, Amazon has, I guess, restricted stuff recently and said you can only publish 3 books a day, but the problem still remains because if you're trying to scam people, it's pretty easy to make multiple Amazon accounts and, like, put up numerous ebooks. Have you heard anything about this?
I only heard what you've told me about it. I gave you, I think, yeah, it was you, a gift for Christmas, which was a mushroom growing book. And because that's been something that you're interested in the past. Instagram, give him some ads for mushroom growing kits. But no, I was like asking you about it because you kind of like looked at it weird and you were like, oh, just so everyone knows, like, if you buy things on Amazon, like, this is something that you have to be aware of. So
Yep.
I was only aware of it through that. I wasn't really aware of it in any other context. I mean, it makes sense. I haven't really heard you told me it in the context of like part of these authors will have these books that come out and like 2 chapters of them will actually be good content and then the rest of them is just like
Yeah. So it's great. You can't trust any books written after 2023. If you do want books, you should probably buy it directly from the publisher. Unfortunately, yeah, you'll pay a lot more. Or go to the library. I'm sure the library has decent copies that you can check out of a lot of books you're interested in. But yeah, I got scammed. $7, not the end of the world, but I'm sure this adds up. If you are interested in a copy of Sex Talks with Vanessa Marin, make sure you are purchasing Sex Talks by Vanessa Marin, not Sex Talks Vanessa Marin. That's the lesson here.
Okay.
And also, I guess with any other books we're recommending moving forward, keep an eye out because it's a terrifying world.
It is.
Jumping back in, Naomi, let's talk about Sex Talks. This is a book written by Vanessa Marin, who is, again, a licensed sex therapist who's been practicing. And in a fun little twist, her husband, Xander, who has no medical training, provides colored commentary throughout the text. And I don't have a lot of critiques of this. I think this is like a really solid book through and through. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to like read a lot of excerpts from this, but there's going to be a lot of content that like you're going to have to purchase the book yourself to get because I like value the author and don't want to like give away the whole game. But I will say this, the Xander stuff, no value. There was like once or twice in the book where I was like, oh, this layman's understanding of sex therapy is actually useful. I didn't find it valuable as like a guy. I didn't find it valuable as like someone who's not a sex therapist. Seemed kind of like he just wanted to get his skin in the game. So good for him, but not the best part of the book. Okay, so let's start with her first section where she talks about why talking about sex is hard. So that's like the entire theme of the book. And this is, I guess, a frustration that a lot of people have because we give the advice, I think, pretty frequently that you should just talk to your partner about stuff. But even with that, there's still like the implicit understanding that like there's a lot of things that partners don't want to hear about sex. There's a lot of things that like it's difficult to articulate about your sexual desires. It's frustrating to even have to approach it. You know, you just want a partner who's psychic and, you know, you don't have to go through all the rigmarole in order to get what you want. So she's, you know, talked about this before, and she mentions that she's put out polls to her Instagram followers and received thousands of responses each time that give her a lot of clarification about, you know, why people run into difficulties. She says, you know, these are just a handful of responses. What holds you back from talking about sex in a relationship was the initial prompt. Things like, I don't want her to feel pressure, shame, the time never feels right, I'm worried that I'm letting her down, I hate being vulnerable, the fear of being judged, we just don't, not knowing what I want, I only know I don't want what my partner currently does, and what I feel kind of summarizes the entire thing, I feel stupid, shy, timid, awkward, and clueless. The whole thing feels taboo. I think that's a pretty good articulation of why people have difficulty talking about sex. So, as Vanessa points out, like, one of the problems is we have this idea that, like, you should be able to talk about things with your partner, but culturally, a lot of things set us up for failure. There's a lot of reasons why talking about sex is not a particularly easy task. So she says, whether from your family, religion, peers, culture, or a delightful combination of the above, you were often taught that sex is something to be ashamed about. That there is a specific set of rules you must abide by, with damning consequences if you don't. That sex is something that happens behind closed bedroom doors and is not to be talked about openly. If you were lucky, the sex education you got took place in a sweaty 8th grade gymnasium and involved having the bejesus scared out of you about genital warts and teenage pregnancy. No one ever taught you how to politely ask your partner to spank your ass or gently request that they stop rubbing their clitoris, your clitoris, like they're trying to scrub a stain out of their favorite t-shirt, or even what a clitoris is in the first place. You almost certainly don't have any positive role models or any examples. I bet you can't pinpoint a single instance when the characters actually talked about what they were doing in a meaningful way. Sex always seems like something that just happens. Does this resonate with you, Naomi?
I would say that I'm actually doing a research project right now on the importance of comprehensive sexual education in schools across the United States, because I learned while doing this research project that only 18 states require medically accurate information for sexual education. And something that a lot of people don't understand about comprehensive sexual education is that it includes awkward talks, how to have awkward talks, how to talk about consent, how to figure out your sexuality, things of that nature. And a lot of people just think, oh, well, sexual education is just how to put a condom on, what birth control is, how to not get pregnant while you're having sex, things of that nature. But a lot of people don't understand that if we were offered comprehensive sexual education, a lot more people would be having more enjoyable sex.
Yeah, and I think not even that, because, like, I agree with you 100%, but, like, I think packaging it in that way is not going to win any friends with, like, super conservative people. The skills that allow you to talk with your partner about sex and your desires are pretty much the same skills that you would need to articulate what your desires are in the rest of the relationship too, right? Like, there's definitely some differences, but for the most part, if you're developing the skills that make you comfortable talking about awkward, embarrassing topics like sex, you're probably also developing the skills to stand up and, like, commit yourself to saying the things you actually need and care about in a relationship, right?
Well, I think it's that, and like practicing those skills with your partner, as well as having an understanding that you want to create a space where no matter what you say, it is a safe space. Like your partner's not going to run there's exceptions obviously to this rule, but if you say something, you are going to be accepted for what you say, and you can at least have a conversation about it without the other person running away. I think that's a vital tool to have in any relationship.
Sure. No, 100%. So one of the other problems is like it's very difficult to know what an appropriate level of sex is in a relationship, right? Like most people have an ego associated with their sexual performance, the amount of sex they're getting, the amount of partners they've had. And so a lot of research makes it clear that like people will exaggerate about, the size of their genitals, the, number of partners they've had, the length of time they can last in bed. And so we all have kind of a bad perception of like sex and relationships. We all have this idea that like sex is just, again, as she said, something that happens where, both partners make eyes at each other and they end up in bed and there's, a magical wrestling match in the sheets and then they go out for chicken and waffles after or something.
That sounds like a great day.
Yeah, that's my ideal date night. By the way, if you want to get in my good graces, we'll talk to Lauren first, but we can.
No. What I'm saying is, if nobody talks about the fact that you should eat before you go on the date. Like you should have sex before you go on the date. So like,
we'll get to
get
that.
there.
Don't spoil things. That's
oh my
one
god, that was
advice.
just my advice. She's stealing my ideas.
Okay, so as she points out that, like, this idea we have about sex being, like, a part of everyone's relationships and everyone's having it all the time is probably not based in reality. I would have liked to see a little more research here, but I think the arguments she makes are solid. So she describes this idea we have as the fucking fairy tale. She says, just like TV and the movies lead us to believe we'll have a meet cute with our one true love, overcome some mild adversity, and then live happily ever after, we're also fed an overly simplified version of what our sex life with said true love will be like. Hollywood sex always unfolds spontaneously and effortlessly, zero communication required. The chemistry is so intense, you can practically feel it through the screen. Couples always orgasm in the same instant, everyone seems wildly satisfied. When I ask people to describe their ideal sex life, the most common word I hear is natural. We crave a feeling of effortlessness we've witnessed on the screen countless times. Except, that's not how it unfolds in actual relationships. So, let's talk about some of the reasons that, like, sex is better at the beginning of relationships and then becomes, like, harder to sustain as time goes on. So, the first one is blaming your brain. So, she says, let's start with one of the most straightforward reasons chemistry with your partner feels so much stronger at the beginning, literal chemistry. In the early months together, the neurotransmitters in your brain go buck wild. The serotonin levels there are similar to those in someone who has obsessive-compulsive disorder, and the dopamine levels mimic being high on cocaine. It's that intense. But this stage can last for only 1 to 3 years max. At that point, your previously surging high-octane transmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, get replaced with oxytocin and vasopressin, which are designed to make us relax and bond. We shift into creating deeper attachment to our partner and forging a strong, secure, lasting foundation. Brain chemistry isn't the entire picture, but it's also useful to know that your brain is physically incapable of maintaining the same level of lust over the long term. Losing desire in your partner is actually more natural than feeling it constantly.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. I mean, like, it makes sense. Like, being in a long-term relationship, you experience that. But at the same time, you also have to, it's hard to you always feel yourself comparing yourself to like the people that you see in movies. So yeah. That's an issue that everybody kind of feels is like, oh, they're always so in love and like their sex life is always the same. And like the woman is always wet for the man and she doesn't need any foreplay and everything happens perfectly.
Yeah.
Oh.
So the second one is stress. And this is something that like seems obvious, but is not something that a lot of people pick up on. So most people have gotten used to juggling never-ending responsibilities and increasing pressure. It's a default mode of functioning, so much that in rare moments when you're not busy, you might find yourself feeling anxious. Stress is the #1 sex drive killer. When you're stressed, your body literally thinks that it's under attack. It goes into fight or flight mode, deciding whether to stay and duke it out or get the hell out of there. During those moments, your system releases a hormone called cortisol, which shuts down necessary functions so you can focus all your energy on protecting yourself. Libido is one of the first things to go. Think about our ancestors. If a caveman was being chased by a woolly mammoth, I'm not sure how historical that is, why would he also need to have an erection at the same time? If anything, a raging boner flapping around between his thighs is just going to slow him down. Cortisol is helpful if you are in danger in the moment. But when your body is constantly in the state of high tension, it basically ensures your sex drive never kicks back into gear. So I've said it once, and I'll say it again, goddammit. Capitalism is ruining people's sex lives.
I think that's a great way of putting it. Think about daily stressors at work. Okay, but I do have to say that if a caveman was running after a woolly mammoth and he had a boner, I feel like that would be a lot more intimidating to the woolly mammoth. That's all I'm saying.
No, he's running from the woolly mammoth. The woolly
mammoth, okay. Yeah. If the woolly mammoth had a boner, that would be a lot more intimidating. God.
I'm glad that all of our listeners have suddenly been like, "What does an elephant penis look like?" But no, I think, this is a really good point, because a lot of families now have both parents working. A lot of partners who don't even have kids, both people are working. They're working 40 or more hours a week in a lot of instances. They're doing jobs that, like, over time, your productivity has gone up significantly since the 1970s, but your pay has not gone up. So you're doing a lot more work and not reaping the benefits. Like, this is all capitalism's fault. Like, it's very difficult to attribute this to, like, anything other than, like, the system we've created where everyone has to be producing in order to, like, not go bankrupt constantly.
Ugh, so true. So true.
Yeah.
Because you're always a heck of a lot closer to going homeless than you are to being a billionaire. Love that.
And then she points out another obvious thing. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply to everyone in our age range, but there are a decent number of people with kids. And she says when you have children, your focus changes. You used to live in your own happy little world together with your partner. And when children are added, they become a happy addition, but they also dramatically change the balance of things. Your partner, in many instances, is no longer going to be your primary focus once kids come into the picture. And she, is citing throughout this entire book people that she works with in therapy. I think she, gives them pseudonyms, so it's not like she's revealing too much. But she says one of her patients, Francesca, lovingly calls her kids the greatest cockblocks of all time. The kids are always around. They manage to sneak into their beds most nights, and Francesca is usually nervous about them overhearing sex or barging in at the worst possible moment. Not for nothing, I do know that, like, one of the things Child Protective Services asks about is, whether or not kids have seen their parents, like, having sex. Now, there's obviously situations where that could be incredibly abusive, but there's also situations where the kid just, like, walks in. And I can imagine that a lot of parents are on edge when they do have sex with their kids are around, knowing that could be used against them if, like, they're accused of abuse, right? So that's an additional stressor. Even when Francesca and Jake are alone, Francesca finds herself struggling to relax. She tells me it's like when we start working from home, sometimes it's hard to separate your work time and your leisure time, except when you're being a parent, you never have the ability to log off. There's really no place in my home I don't feel like a parent. With work, at least, your boss doesn't wake you up in the middle of the night because they had another nightmare about monsters. Relationship researcher, yeah, I mean, I hope my boss doesn't text me about that. Relationship researcher John Gottman found that 67% of couples report that their marital satisfaction plummeted after having kids. But the problem, of course, is since you have kids, since you have all these priorities, you can't even dedicate the time to talking about, diagnosing, or doing anything to fix your relationship, right? Scheduling date nights, scheduling therapy, scheduling anything that takes you away from your kids is incredibly, incredibly difficult, and in this economy, expensive. So, like, Francesca tells her, Vanessa, that it's easier to let things slide than to address them. I'm just so tired that a difficult conversation is the last thing I want to do until I realize I'm in survival mode and unsure how to move forward with someone who's a roommate with whom I'm raising kids. Oof. Oof, oof, oof.
And people ask me why I don't want to have kids anytime soon.
Because you're selfish. That's why.
Yeah, that's exactly why. How'd you know?
I'm thinking back to, you hear about all of these tribes around the world who have these traditions of like communally raising kids. And you think about it, that makes so much sense. Because it's like, hey, there's older people who have lots of spare time who are just hanging around the village. They can watch kids, and mom and dad can go off and bone in a cave or bone in the jungle somewhere, or even at their house. You also will imagine that there are times that like both parents might get sick and like there's something going around, and so it's important to have a relative or someone who's a friend who can come over and watch the kids. This idea that everyone needs to be this autonomous unit who can take care of everything by themselves and has like complete control of their life is just this capitalism that, once again, capitalism has sold us, because like it's so much better and more efficient to have backups, to have people in your life who you can rely upon when you need to de-stress, when you need an opportunity to have difficult conversations. Okay, so there's kids, there's stress, there's your brain and dopamine. She also talks about the pain of rejection. So she says that at the beginning of a relationship, it feels easy to say yes to everything. You agree to all date night ideas, even the ones that feel a little out of your comfort zone. You take your partner up on most of the invitations and have sex. It feels you have all this good energy and momentum propelling you forward. That all comes to a screeching halt when the word no enters your relationship vocabulary. Now she underlines this, and she's like, look, I want to be perfectly clear in saying that you are always allowed to say no to anything for any reason. That said, rejection is a normal and healthy part of every relationship, but no one is prepared for it. Hearing the word no from our partner, especially when it comes to sex, typically brings up enormous amounts of shame. She has memories seared into her brain of her partner turning her down for sex, and feelings of embarrassment, even humiliation, that overcame her in those moments. Rejection feels so terrible, and this applies to like our entire lives. It's not just sex in general. And if your partner turns you down, your instinct is likely to stop initiating. But then if no one's initiating, what happens to the sex life? Usually it just kind of grinds to a halt.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, performance issues. So our bodies aren't machines, and they don't always do what we want them to. It's normal to experience a dry vulva, soft penis, or orgasm that's too fast or takes too long. Stress can also make all these issues so much worse. But performance issues definitely aren't part of the fucking fairy tale, so that leaves us feeling like it's yet another thing we can't talk about openly. Right? Like, everyone wants to be, like, a cool, sexy partner who's, like, down for everything, and, they got the biggest erections, and they got all the good bits. Boy, I'm really good. I should write erotica for a living. But yeah, I think all these are like really, really solid articulations of why it's so difficult to talk about sex and some of the barriers you need to overcome if you expect to make a dent in conversations with your partner.
I you keep saying things, and I'm just like, yeah, I agree with them.
Great. I'm glad that I am a smarty pants who's just literally reading stuff off of the page.
Woohoo!
Okay, so there is also the underlying overhanging problem of perfectionism, which is everyone wants to be perfect at sex. I would say this is pretty similar to what she's already talked about, but it's important to discuss because, as she points out, in a Hollywood version of sex, everyone knows what they're doing and they all look sexy doing it. No one has ever had to ask for directions on how to perform varsity-level oral sex. No one ever has a pimple on their butt or pieces of toilet paper stuck in their labia. No one's ever thinking about their grocery list while being ravaged by their partner. It leaves us feeling like we have to be just as polished in the bedroom, a phenomenon I call sexual perfectionism. It's the desire to control every aspect of an interaction so you seem flawless to your partner and yourself. If you can't talk about sex in your relationship, sexual perfectionism takes a dangerously strong hold on you. No one ever teaches people how to be perfect at sex, so they turn to movies and porn for advice. Sexual perfectionism leaves no room for the intricacies of being human, and it tells us that physical intimacy needs it. Speaking of perfectionism... Sexual perfectionism leaves no room for the intricacies of being human, and it tells us that physical intimacy needs to fit an exacting set of standards. Here are some of the ways my clients have described their expectations of sex. I should be able to get turned on spontaneously and easily. I should have a hot body that looks incredible in every position. I should be confident, wild, and uninhibited. Every time I try something new, it should happen exactly as I plan. We need to have simultaneous orgasms every time. I should satisfy my partner and be the best they've ever had. So yeah, all of these are big problems. All of these contribute to people not wanting to talk about sex, people feeling too drained to talk about sex. This is one of the reasons that, like, sex therapy is so important, because it allows them to open up. And I do feel that like Vanessa has taken her 20 years of experience and condensed it in a meaningful way within this text, because there's a lot of really good answers to how to overcome these problems with your partner throughout the rest of the book. Anything you want to talk about before we get into releasing the pressure?
No, let's do it. I'm interested.
Okay. So how do you release this pressure? How do you talk about this in a better, more healthy way? So she says there's a couple of steps that you have to consider before you even like initiate this with your partner. The first one is feel your feels. So Vanessa says that often some of her patients, like Francesca, will say things like, I hate myself for doing that. So Vanessa will reply and say something along the lines of, I know you're feeling a whole lot of feelings about what's going on with you and Jake right now. You're confused, sad, upset, hopeless, anxious, and so much more. And I heard you beat yourself up for having those emotions. Not only are you thus dealing with the feelings themselves, which are challenging enough, you're also heaping on your feelings about your feelings. That's just too much. So she says, it's really important that you give yourself permission to feel whatever it is that you're feeling. Whenever you notice yourself having a thought or emotion about your sex life, tell yourself, okay, I'm anxious or frustrated or sad, and that's all right. I don't need to criticize myself about it too. The best way to navigate feelings is to simply notice them and leave them be. What we resist persists. When we accept our own emotions and experiences, they actually dissipate much faster. That's the foundation of emotional intelligence. What do we think?
So I have an issue with like just letting them be. I feel like having a good, this is my own experience, having a good understanding of your feelings is always the best thing. Like I feel like that's vital for any human being in general, knowing what you're feeling and kind of getting to the root of it. I specifically am talking about like anxiety for myself. If I'm feeling anxious about something, I try to get to the root of it to try to find what I'm feeling anxious about and then take action on it. And I would say that this is interesting advice, because I don't think that having these feelings, like let's just say, oh, I'm feeling these things about my sex life, and just letting them be and like feeling them is the best idea. I feel like acting on them or talking about them with your partner would be the best plan of action.
Well, yeah, I mean, sure, but this doesn't exist in a vacuum. You know, she's saying do this as well as other things.
Okay, give me another one then.
Well, okay, so I guess what's important is to stress that, like, if you are thinking to yourself, I feel like I'm bad in bed, often the response might be in your brain, entirely confined within your own thoughts. Well, maybe, you're being too hard on yourself. And then this fight begins where it's like, well, all my sexual role models are, awesome and virile and incredible. And then you're like, well, you're not as young and fresh and cool as them. And so, like, you're fighting this battle without really even engaging with the feeling itself of, like, feeling bad in bed. And I think what she's saying is, like, look, it's okay to accept certain truths or feel certain things about yourself without having to engage with it. Just, like, let it go. Like, it's in your thought, it's in your head, you can look at it, you can poke at it, you can say, what does this tell me about myself? But you don't have to, like, form an identity around it, nor, like, compound your anxieties by fighting these battles on every front.
Okay. Changing the narrative on me, I see.
So the second one is play out the tape. Ask yourself the sobering question, what will your sex life look like if you continue taking a perfectionistic approach to sex? This might sound dramatic, but how will you feel if you're on your deathbed, looking back at a lifetime refusing to try new techniques, being lost in self-critical thoughts, and never experiencing true intimacy with a partner? Third thing is examine your expectations. Make a list of exactly what you think you're supposed to do in the bedroom. Take a good hard look at it and ask yourself if these expectations are reasonable. Would you tell your best friend that they needed to live up to those same guidelines? Sometimes taking an objective look at the expectations you have of yourself help you realize how ridiculously high you set your standards. So, like, she does this exercise sometimes with clients where she's like, write down, like, all the things that you expect. And, she did this with one of her clients who was in, a queer relationship. And this client wrote on the list, get a boner as soon as I initiate. And Vanessa asks him, so you think you should be able to get hard with zero stimulation? And he's like, okay, fine. When you put it that way, it's like completely ridiculous. But again, like, people have all these tropes, these like internalized ideas about how sex should work from movies and TV, and often like a lot of it's ridiculous. The way that like everyone has anal sex, but no one ever has to do the prep and cleanup associated with it, right?
Yeah.
And so like similarly, it's very possible that you as an individual possess some ideas about sex, some expectations about sex that are like completely silly, and you should at least take a look written down at what they say and ask yourself if that like actually makes sense and is something like you should hold yourself to.
Okay. I like the example that she gave of her queer patient or queer client.
So the next one is identify the true villain. If you're a perfectionist, your brain likely spews controlling and insulting thoughts at you all day long. These judgments can be frequent and intense, and so intense that you assume you're the one thinking them. But you're actually hearing the voice of your inner critic, which is just one very small part of you. If you name that villain or even come up with a full character for them, you can distance yourself from these harsh thoughts. When you hear your inner critic jabbering away at you, talk back to them. So her client Francesca loved this tool and decides to name her inner critic Barb. The next time she caught Barb telling her she couldn't possibly initiate sex, she said to herself, okay, Barb, I know you're worried about looking like an idiot, but Jake hasn't ever laughed at me and he's always telling me he wants to feel desired by me. When she notices negative thoughts during sex, she thought, listen, Barb, I know you've got a thing about my stomach pouch hanging over and I'm on top, but I'm done letting you dictate my sex life. I like that.
Okay.
I like this idea of like turning your inner critic into someone you like absolutely hate and think is stupid and being like, yeah, you're a jerk and I'm going to kick your ass.
Yeah, the proving wrong of, yeah, my partner has never had an issue with my body. Why are you having an issue with my body? Barb, you aren't the one having sex with my husband, Patrick, okay? Okay, Barb?
Two last ones. Make a plan. So, like, one client was, like, really concerned about trying cowgirl, and she felt intimidated by asking her husband, and her husband's in the same therapy session. So Vanessa looks over and is like, do you want to try it? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, you swear you're not going to laugh at her, even if she looks ridiculous? And he's like, yeah. And that's it. Like that's it. Now, obviously, like, we're skipping a couple of steps because that's talking directly to the partner. But, like, she says it can really sometimes be just as simple as that. Bring your fears out into the light of day and make a game plan for addressing worst-case scenarios. And then finally, she's like, look, you have to open up to your partner. She says, we're not yet in the section of the book where you're having structured conversations with your partner. It's still a good time to think about how you might eventually talk to your partner about your fears. Can you tell your partner about the fucking fairy tale version of sex you're trying to dismantle, the sexual perfectionism you're battling? Can you open up about your specific fears or anxiety? Can you create a safe space for them to share your own struggles with you? And she guarantees that you're probably not going to be alone in that. So again, like, these are, I think, some good strategies to start thinking about how your sex life is impacted by the media, the things you've heard from your cultural group about sex. You know, release the pressure, feel your feels, play out the tape, examine expectations, identify true villains, Barb, make a plan, and open up to your partner. It's a really good start.
No, I completely agree. I think these are all really good action plans. Now I want to know what the rest of the book is because she literally just gave like 10 great steps. It wasn't 10, but still.
This is chapter 1 of like 10 chapters.
I'm just curious, like, what the rest of the book is about then.
Barb. Probably Barb.
Yeah, Barb sucks.
Well, let's get into it, Naomi. Let's get into chapter 2, creating a user creating your user manual.
Okay,
so I'm skipping some stuff. I actually will skip a couple chapters in this book, and again, I think that like people should be able to purchase this book if they find it interesting and get additional insights that I did not spoil. So yeah, do it yourself. So she says, let's talk about, you know, who you are as a person, identify some of the stuff about you, what you want, what you desire, understand more about yourself so that you can feel more comfortable talking about this with others. So one of the first things she talks about is libido. And she says that one of the biggest frustrations people have with their sex life is feeling like they have a low libido. So most people have this desire in their heads of how often and how strongly they're supposed to desire sex, but feel like they're not living up to their own expectations. When we asked our Instagram audience if they wanted to have a higher sex drive, 77% of the respondents said yes. Right?
Okay, that makes sense.
After seeing that poll, a number of people messaged to say, I want sex more, but I can't even get to that place. So she says that dealing with a low sex drive can be emotionally painful. You might fear that something's wrong with you if your sex drive was never really high to begin with. If it decreased over time, you may worry that you'll never be able to get it back, or you might externalize it like Aaliyah, wondering if you're not able, this is one of her patients, wondering if you're not in the right relationship or with the right partner. So she argues that we now have tools in order to identify the type of sex drive you have. And it's really important that you do this so you can set up situations where you're more likely to be aroused or want to arouse your partner, if that makes sense, right? If you're constantly stressed all the time and there's never a situation where you would feel sexy or comfortable, you're probably never going to feel sexy or comfortable.
Are you talking about in general in your life or in your relationship?
Which part?
The part where you feel comfortable and sexy. Are you talking about getting to I'm confused on what part of your life you're talking.
I'm talking about it all. But I guess specifically for the context of this book, being comfortable in the spaces you share with your partner to be sexy.
Okay.
The first thing is, she says there are two completely different types of sex drive. So sex therapy has come up with this theory in the last couple of years. She references Emily Nagoski's book, which I would also like to read for this podcast, Come As You Are. So she says if you want to have an active sex life, it's crucial you identify your type. And then she says that this is something that a lot of people in her Instagram circles have responded positively to. When she posts about this, people are like, I've never fully understood what I am, how, I get aroused. I'm so appreciative that you're able to share this with me. So, patting herself on the back. So she says there's two ways we get turned on and ready for sex. In our heads, mental desire, and our bodies, physical arousal. Mental desire is when sex sounds good. For people with penises, physical arousal means getting an erection, testicles tightening and lifting. For people with vaginas, it means getting lubricated. For everyone, it means nipples getting hard, heart rate increasing, breath deepening, and blood rushing to the genitals. Most people think of desire and arousal as the same thing, and that both should happen at the same time. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, you should feel interested in sex and your body should be perfectly ready to have it in that instant. But in reality, mental desire and physical arousal happen separately, and your sex drive depends on whether you initially feel interested in getting intimate in your head or in your body. So if you're a spontaneous type, you feel mental desire first, then physical arousal second. If you're a responsive type, you feel physical arousal first, then mental desire second. What do you think?
Responsive is your type, so that means that you respond to other people stimulating your arousal?
Your sex drive type depends on where you initially feel interested in getting intimate.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but what I'm saying is why do they name it responsive?
Because you respond to the fact you're already physically aroused.
Okay, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying now. Okay.
I'm not saying these are the best names, but they at least differentiate it.
Yeah.
We have these two types, spontaneous and responsive, and she doesn't leave it there. She gives you a lot more details about this. So spontaneous desire occurs when you're just going about your day and you suddenly realize you're mentally in the mood. When the characters in your favorite TV show have passionate impromptu sex against the wall or the favorite restaurant bathroom because they can't wait another second, that's spontaneous desire at play. You're probably spontaneous if you feel the desire for sex at seemingly random points throughout your day, middle of a work meeting, raking your lawn, or even on the toilet. You sometimes feel the desire for sex before your body responds, as in you're in the mood but you don't have an erection, aren't wet, or haven't had other physical responses. You're typically the one who initiates sex in your relationship. You seem to want sex more frequently than your partner. And you can feel turned on in a lot of different situations. Responsive desire is the exact opposite. It's when you get mentally turned on in response to some sort of physical stimulus. You might be watching a hot sex scene in a movie or kissing your partner, and you notice you're starting to tingle between your legs. Sometimes you don't feel mentally interested in sex if you already had sex and it's over. You might have a responsive... Sorry, let me back up. Sometimes you don't feel mentally interested in sex until you've already had sex and it's over. You might have a responsive sex drive if you rarely think about sex. Sex doesn't sound tempting until you're getting started or in the middle of it. Sometimes at the end of sex, you think to yourself, that was fun. Why don't I want that more often? You rarely initiate sex with your partner. You seem to want less sex less frequently with your partner. And it feels like the situation needs to be just right in order for you to feel turned on. So the bedroom has to be tidy, the kids have to be asleep, and you have to be fresh out of the shower. Here's another way to sum up the two types. Spontaneous desire, you feel turned on, and then you start having sex. Responsive desire, start having sex, then you feel turned on. What do we think?
I feel like that's just the difference between, like that's just biological differences. Like, I learned something recently where it's like it takes 20 minutes for a woman to get turned on. So wouldn't that just be biological differences?
She says that, like, these types of desires can happen to either sex. But she also says, yes, men tend to be more spontaneous, women tend to be more responsive. I feel awkward making biological conclusive statements on this podcast, because I think one of the things we fight against is people who want to put, like, clear boundaries on what it means to biologically be a man or biologically.
Sure. Right? Yeah, let's not do that then. Okay, let's move on then.
Cool. So each of the two sex drive types also has its own challenges. In my clinical experience, she says spontaneous sex drive types experience more performance issues than responsive types. If you're a spontaneous type, you can feel the mental interest in sex, but your body won't always respond. You're turned on, your partner's turned on, but you're as soft as a sea cucumber, as dry as a desert. And for most people, she says that's a deeply humiliating experience. It shouldn't be, but it often is. If you're a responsive sex drive type, you have completely different struggles, mainly stemming from the fact that most people don't realize this type of desire exists. It probably seems to you and your partner that you rarely or even never want sex, but it's just not true. You're not low desire, you just need to feel physically aroused first, and then your mental desire will follow. Your desire is going to show itself when you give it something to respond to. So you need to rejigger your expectations about the order of events when you're having sex with your partner. Allow yourself to start getting physical first, in a way that feels safe, then see if that leads you wanting more. So the question you should ask yourself after listening to this episode, this is for our listeners, what sex drive do you think you have? What type do you think your partner has? And how have either similarities or differences between those interrupted, benefited your relationship?
Okay. I feel like this is pretty solid advice.
Yeah. She also points out immediately after this that, like, it's not just important to know what turns you on, it's also important to know what turns you off. Because often people can feel a desire to not have sex, and that interferes with sex more than people not feeling the desire to have sex. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think I worded that incredibly poorly, but I'm glad you...
No, I get what you mean.
Okay. So it's a question that most people have when they're struggling with low sex drive. We all want to know that one simple trick that will magically get us all fired up. Is there a magic pill, supplements, oysters, chocolate, crystal you put under your pillow at night? There's something else we have to explore, though, and that's figuring out the things that turn you off. And you have to do this. You have to actually sit down and think about this as a listener to figure out, the things that you consider unsexy and undesirable that get you out of the headspace of being turned on and wanting to have sex. So she says, think about a recent time your partner initiated sex, but you weren't in the mood. Try to remember as many details of that moment as you can, then think about these questions. Was there anything about the specific situation that made you disinterested in sex? Was there anything you did, purposely or accidentally, that turned you off? Was there anything your partner did, purposely or accidentally, that put you into reverse? So she says, she's asked some of the people on Instagram again for responses, and they've given her a lot. Things like, I was tired, I was full, I was intoxicated, my partner initiated sex in a way I didn't like. I was afraid I would be in pain during sex. I felt stressed or pressured. I was worried about my appearance. I was unhappy with my partner. I was worried about pregnancy or STIs. I was triggered by memories of abuse. I was depressed or anxious. I'm dealing with an injury. There wasn't enough time. He knew I wouldn't enjoy the sex that we would have. I felt guilty or ashamed. Or, the thing that often comes up, I was focused on other things like the kids or my to-do list. So she says you should do this every single time, like, you're running into issues with having sex, try to identify some common themes, figure out what the 3 most frequent dynamics that typically put you into reverse, and what are the 3 most powerful things you or your partner could do to prevent you from going into reverse.
Okay, I like this idea. I'm liking this book so far, Joel. Good pick.
Thank you. I think that probably is going to be where we wrap up today. There is more to the chapter. She gives you another couple of pages and talks about pain during sex, and I think that's like an incredibly important topic. She points out that like 30% of women experienced pain during their last sexual encounter, according to a April 2015 issue of the Journal of Sexual Medicine. And she's like, hey, don't continue having sex if you're constantly in pain. You need to make some incremental changes so that that's not the case, and figure out what your partner's doing if that continues to happen. But yeah, she gives some like really solid advice here. I don't really want to get into the details. I think it gets a little too technical. I do think it's very useful if this is something that applies to you. But yes, if you're listening to this, keep in mind a decent number of women might experience pain during sex. So use that knowledge when you are attempting to initiate sex with women, and don't be a dick about it.
Woohoo! You're right. Solid advice, Joel.
Woohoo! So yeah, I think that's where we're going to put a pin in it for today. We will probably do 1 or 2 more episodes about this, where she gets into the step-by-step process of like bringing up these topics and having the difficult conversations with your partner. A lot of what we've just discussed is effectively just groundwork, right? Like, it's a lot of identifying within yourself the things that you want to see prior to initiating those conversations. And, you know, I've been reading a lot about sustainable change recently. Like, how do you change organizations that have, like, super unsustainable behaviors? And one of the pieces of advice they give is there's typically an 8-step framework that you have to go through step by step in order to get to your desired outcome. And technically, like, you can skip steps. The problem is, if you're skipping steps, you're probably not building the infrastructure, the support, the group and peer dynamics you need in order to achieve the change that you want. And in the same way, I think, like, you can probably skip a lot of this book and get straight to, like, the conversation stuff. But if you haven't done any of the groundwork, if you haven't thought about what personally turns you on, some of the things you're identifying as problems in the relationship, some of the stressors in your life, you're going to run into problems. Right? This advice is not so easy that, you know, there's like a Post-it card you could fit it all onto and references needed. This is like a complicated approach to a very difficult issue, and you have to really engage with it in order to get the optimal results.
Okay. I like the fact that a lot of people think that they can. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say a lot of people. I'm the type of person that I will over-analyze my actions and think that I've come up with, I therapy talk myself. And so I'm like, oh, I don't need therapy. I just therapy talked myself. And so I feel like this applies directly to me in the sense where I'm like, okay, I'm going to take action without fully processing everything that I need to process in order to, you know, do the damn thing correctly.
Yeah, I definitely fall into this trope, too, in a lot of my personal life, where I did speech and debate, and one of the events is impromptu, and one of the events is extemp, and both of them are very quick events where you have limited time to prep a speech, and so you get really, really good at bullshitting. You get really, really good at stringing words together, and not necessarily them making sense all the time. But then you start developing the habit where you're like, well, if I can do that so quick, maybe I don't need to do the groundwork in order to have difficult conversations. I can just, like, as the conversation comes up, you know, work my way through it, you know, fumbling around in the dark. And no, doesn't always work. It's only going to get you so far. If you're competing against, you know, smart high schoolers, it might do well. But once you're in the real world with a partner who has it's a tough cookie, it gets a little more difficult. Not everyone's going to be a smart high schooler. That's the best advice I can give you in life. You can't go through life thinking that your competition's just smart high schoolers.
You're so right. Yeah. Well, we appreciate you listening, audience. We hope you have a great week. Wear a condom, grow a beard, and we love you.
We have many thanks for the use of our theme music, which is the song Drop by Ketsa. You can find more of their music online at ketsa.uk. You can also find Date These Guys online on Twitter and Instagram at DateTheseGuys, or visit datetheseguys.org. If you have questions for the podcast or want to be a wealthy sugar parent, send an email to datetheseguys@gmail.com. If you're looking to make an impact in the world, this show strongly recommends Planned Parenthood, a nonprofit organization that provides reproductive health care in the United States. Planned Parenthood provides birth control, long-acting reversible contraceptive implants, clinical breast examinations, pregnancy screenings, prenatal care, testing and treatment for sexually transmitted infections, and abortions. They also do great work for those who are lower income. 4/5 of their clients are at or below 50% of the federal poverty line. Both Joel and Naomi are monthly donors to Planned Parenthood. We hope you will be too.